The Spiritual Scientist podcast is joined today by Gigi Young. And Gigi is an intuitive, a spiritual teacher, a YouTuber, and as we were just joking, an e-celebrity, just like me. You know, big e-celebrities. We've got to stay connected. There are some gremlins working in the background here around audio and stuff. We don't want to name these gremlins; that they shouldn't be named, or perhaps they should be. Gigi, you can correct me on that.
Well,
but listen,
yes. Araman was trying to actually disrupt the podcast today, but we persevered.
Yeah, yes. we the forces of good have won again. But Gigi, thank you very, very much for joining me. It's great to have you here, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I discovered when I first came across your videos, one of the first ones I saw was actually really funny, and it was the humor that actually drew me in. I didn't quite get your humor at first, and then because it was quite subtle, and it took me a little while. But it was actually in your series, in plain sight series that you were doing, and you were really looking into pop culture quite a lot, and you did a reaction video to the halftime Super Bowl performance, let's call it that for a start, by The Weeknd. And it was like one of those reaction videos, and I don't generally like those reaction videos, but you did it in a really interesting way, and it was actually really, really funny. And there was this moment where you said there was these like priest robots and you're like sort of grooving along, and you said well, they're priest robots, but they've still got the moves. And anyway, it's a really enjoyable video. But I thought that we might come back to that kind of thing, because I am interested in your take on a lot of stuff that goes on in popular culture, not just being performances, but actually, in a sense, being rituals that we take part in. But maybe we could go back a few steps, and I'd like to ask you just about your spiritual journey in general, and how you ended up being where you're at today as a YouTuber and influencer or something like
that. Yeah. So I was always interested in spiritual things, and I always felt very drawn to it. But I think in my earlier years, being kind of a millennial, there wasn't a lot of information on it. And so I didn't really get too involved in it. I only could read what I could get. And then later in my life, I was actually traveling, and I was actually in Japan, and I was pretty lonely. I didn't speak the language. I found the culture to be kind of strange. You know, I was only like late teenager, early 20s or something. And I started to have all of these spiritual experiences. I started having visions. I started seeing very strange things, and I could, see people in the room. And obviously, most people might think, oh, that's a schizophrenic break or something. But for me, it had meaning, and I was able to kind of feel it was very mysterious, but I could feel that it was kind of spiritually leading me somewhere. And the weird thing about those experiences, though, was that they were very cosmic. So I was out there reading books about, like, your angel and your spirit guide and all of this very new agey stuff. But then my experiences were like, okay, there's this craft that's in the sky and it's flying above this very advanced city. I think that this must be like an alien or a UFO kind of experience. And I really couldn't find anything that was like that. It was basically like the most material was this very watered down new age material that was like, your spirit guide is a Native American and or that kind of thing. And so my spirit guide wasn't a Native American. It was obviously this man in white robes, but they had this advanced technology, which was very bizarre. And so I thought that was like an alien abduction encounter. I thought it was an alien experience. And that drew me into the new age scene, specifically the kind of spiritual, the spiritual cosmic new age scene. And I was in that for a really long time, trying to make sense of my experiences, and kind of got drawn into that. And then it kind of stopped. I guess it sort of wasn't really enough. Like, I couldn't make a cosmology out of the New Age material. It was always just personal experiences, anecdotal stories, and sort of just pieces, which eventually wasn't enough to have like an actual system or an actual cosmology. And that's when a friend of mine said, some of the things that you say sound like Rudolf Steiner. And I was like, oh, who's that? And they're like, well, this is, it's a turn of the century mystic. And, at the time, I think I was doing research into, clairvoyantly seeing basically the eighth sphere. And, they said, why don't you look into Rudolf Steiner and the eighth sphere? And so I got some material. They're all free, obviously, online, which is amazing. And I was like, whoa, this is this is really hard to read, because you go into modern spiritualism and it's like pablum. A lot of it is based on what you want to hear, and feeling good. That's kind of like the modern spiritualism today. And this was something else. This was, an actual scientific explanation of other realms. And it was serious. And I was like, whoa, can I even handle that kind of intense, there was almost like a responsibility in reading it. Like, this is very real. It had a realness to it. And so that was my beginning with studying anthroposophy, but also a lot of earlier mysticism, which was when I really feel like I finally got my stride. So long story short, but that's about 12 years or something, in there. So.
Okay. Yeah, it's always fascinating how people, find Rudolf Steiner's work and how they come to it. It's interesting what you said there about this feeling of responsibility. Steiner often talks about that it's not what he's writing about and speaking about isn't just, dead knowledge that we can just pick up and have a bit of fun with and throw away kind of thing, that it's actually, if you do take it seriously, that it's actually a living knowledge that should change us, actually, do something to us, change us and the world in a way. So is that kind of how you experienced it as well?
Yeah. You can sense the kind of truth in it. And after you'd read something, it would be strange. I would read it and I'd feel like I didn't understand it. And I was like, is this because it's originally, German and it's translated and it's, from the turn of the century, I wasn't sure if that's why it was, the iambic pentameter wasn't the same kind of thing. Like, it wasn't the same rhythm as normal. And then I realized that even though I would read it, sometimes a week later, I would understand what it was. And I'd go back and I'd read it again and I'd understand it. So it's almost like the first time I would read it, it would be like, I don't know if I understand this, but it's that living element in the teaching, in the work that works upon you after you've stopped reading it. It works in your kind of your system. And then a week later, you can have this epiphany. And only something that's truly potent, that really has that spirit in it, can do that to you. It is possible. But the person has to be it has to be very potent. And that's what I realized that was, which is very potent teachings. That when you hear that truth, it just works upon you because the truth is within you. And so when you hear it outside of you, then it will awaken you. But you have to have that really good stream. Yeah. Which is alive. Yeah. Because truth is alive. It's a living astral essence. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm really interested in this. How did you bring together can we just call it the alien stuff? I don't know what to actually call it, but this is a thing. This is a thing where, because there's quite a few different perspectives out there. You know, I've listened to quite a bit of Jay Dyer. I don't know if you know him. He's sort of looks into film and stuff like that. But there's the Collins brothers evoking the beyond. I haven't read it, but it's like 1,000 pages or something.
Wow.
And you know, that's really saying it's just government conspiracy. It's just literally government propaganda to change the image of what a human being is and lead us to this different kind of future. And you've got, you know, the perspective of people who see it from a much more spiritual perspective. You've got people that see it from a purely materialistic perspective, that it's another species from another planet. They're coming to do this to humans, etc. So there's quite a few different perspectives, and I've never really dived that deep into it, but I've never been able to quite marry it with anthroposophy, with what Steiner says, apart from possibly that there are Ahrimanic elements at play, but I'm really not sure. So I don't know, can you help me and others?
Yeah, absolutely. So the kind of phenomenon that we see that we think are extraterrestrial could really be many different things. And so I think one of the problems is we keep trying to classify like a light in the sky as being one thing. Oh, that's an extraterrestrial from basically the physical plane in another planet, or oh, that's an interdimensional, or oh, and really it could be many different things. I mean, it could be an elemental being, right? There are elementals that can appear as lights in the sky, and that can look sort of take on a kind of human appearance, but there's something a little bit off about them because they're not human. They're like an elemental that's in a kingdom below human, right? So there could be an elemental aspect to this, which is certainly what the folklore of, you know, Great Britain would say. A lot of the things that happen with that are attributed to sort of tricky fairies and things, you know, stealing babies, even things like changelings. That's very similar to the alien gray phenomenon, you know. And so you look back and you see, well, a lot of these things were sort of supernatural phenomenon. They've been going on for actually a very long time, and you know, attributing that to supernatural, you know, that wasn't a superstitious thing. It's that there actually is realms beyond the physical plane that are full of life, that are full of different beings. And then so you have the possibility of it being interdimensionals, of it being like an elemental, which is really connected to the earth, but interdimensionals could be coming from, for example, the eighth sphere, right? One of the most fascinating things about sort of these lower dark entities from the eighth sphere, which is this sort of catch-all that's around the earth, as you probably know, in Rudolf Steiner's work, is that Ahriman actually wrests the matter away from the earth. He actually creates the eighth sphere and gives life to it, animates it by stealing the matter of the earth. And that's how he does that. So he kind of does this kind of transubstantiation where he takes the matter from the earth and he creates the eighth sphere basically as a parasitic entity from us. And so these beings very well could also be, especially the darker ones, beings that are outside of our evolutionary wave, outside of the life wave, that are trapped in the eighth sphere, that try to enter back into the life wave. They try to enter back into the earth. And they never really fully look human. There's always something a little off about them. They're always a chimera, or they're always some kind of human form like the gray that's half deformed. Well, this is because they're outside of the life wave. They're outside of the evolutionary arc. And in anthroposophy, there is the idea, and also in theosophy and in mysticism in general, that you can have like the life wave that's evolving, but then there's also these essences that don't sort of make the initiation of the epoch. And they're sort of outside of the life wave, but they're always seeking to come back in it. And a lot of the things about these darker entities being parasitic is really about them wanting to enter back into this life wave because it's really their only evolutionary opportunity. That's how I see it. And the reason why they can physicalize is because, again, the eighth sphere is literally the matter that's wrested from the earth anyway. So there's no issue with planes, because if you have someone that's from Venus, if you have an entity that's from Venus, and we do know in anthroposophy that the spheres are populated, they have beings in them. Like there's Venusian beings, there's, you take a sojourn on Mars, you take a sojourn on Venus. And that Venus, it's kind of more like a plane, really. The planet, how I understand it actually, is that the planet really marks the plane in orbit. But if being actually is from another planetary sphere, that is of a different kind of matter. It's not of Earth matter. So it's actually a different quality. It's not just a more rarefied matter. It's a different kind of matter. And so there's an issue, in my opinion, with actually having beings come from other spheres, the way that we think. I don't know if this is making sense. So what we're seeing, I think a lot of it is probably more connected to the eighth sphere and these beings that are outside evolution, with rare occasions where we do get beings that are from other planetary spheres, but only at certain times for an evolutionary purpose. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, I mean they're big they're big pictures to try and grasp, but maybe one way to go with it is to ask, what are they doing? What's their task? Obviously, there's the beings that want to draw physical matter into their sort of own sphere or create their own world in a way. What are they all doing, and how can we? What are they to do with us, in a sense? Like, are they to help our evolution along? Because obviously, we can think of the dark element and the false light element, if you like. They have their role in human evolution. In a sense, we need them to grow. Without the darkness, there can't be light, etc. But so to ask you about what are they doing and how can we work with them or against them or whatever, that kind of question.
Yeah. One really interesting way to look at it that I've sort of come to be more favorable is that we've actually always interacted with these beings, with beings of the darkness and beings of the light, because there's always been people on the earth that are darker in that sense and that communicate with these beings. It's something that people don't really like to talk about. But they've always sort of been present. I just think that it makes most sense to me that we're just labeling them as aliens because we've sunk so deeply into materialism that we think everything has to occur on the physical plane, and we only want to see it as that. And so I think that it's very, very likely that the government has, I don't want to flag your channel, so we'll tread lightly, but I do think that there are certain, crafts that people think are aliens, but it's definitely not. It's definitely ours. And I think that's very important in this conversation to say is there's that element of manipulation, which gets to your question, which is, what do they want? What are they doing? And I think that there is a darker aspect that literally does serve Ahriman, that does serve these darker forces. And I think there's a couple of things that are very interesting about how they tend to behave. So one thing is that they're actually very obsessed with genetics and genetic engineering. This seems to be something that this darker group or this darker aspect seems to be obsessed with. We see that today in modern times with what's going on. And we also see it in the past with this idea that these Anunnaki or whatever came to the planet, and they genetically modified humanity. And, if you look at some of the most popular New Age ideologies and ideologies in ufology, you see this completely, what I would consider, satanic ideology, which is that man was created by aliens. And so this is what I think is a completely Ahrimanic idea. You have these alien scientists that are flying around in the solar system, seeding worlds and creating beings. And this is absolutely the externalization and the hypermaterialization of what we understand in anthroposophy and in the spiritual community as, the transmigration of souls, which is a totally spiritual process of when you pass away, your soul may take a life on another planet, and it will come back around. And so there's the transmigration of souls, which can include lives on other worlds. This is making that completely materialistic, and it's taking away the metamorphosis of the human being over extremely long periods of time, and saying, no, an alien did that. An alien is the reason why we've risen above the animal kingdom. So this is a very dark ideology, but people are absolutely fascinated by it. But I think it's a controlling ideology, and I think it's something that we have to be very careful of.
That was where I was hoping you went, actually, because for me, when I've heard that as well, and I think you articulate it really well, it's just like an enhanced Darwinism, really. It's just
Yes.
an enhanced Darwinism. Okay, this more highly evolved beings on another planet came here, they did it, but it's still, it doesn't answer any of the cosmological questions. It doesn't answer the creator question. It doesn't answer, was there an agent at the beginning? It's still just, no, Big Bang, there was nothing, now there's everything. You get away with that. They still get away with it. And I think it was Richard Dawkins, the arch sort of atheist, said, I think I can go with this. He said something like that, I can go with this alien narrative. It works for me.
The materialists, yeah. The people, they for some reason it's their religious tenet. That's how I see it. It completely deprives the human being of connecting with their Christ essence inside, their spiritual essence inside. It's a mockery of it, actually. And it's so tempting because so many people do believe in Darwinian evolution, and they believe in a materialist scientific worldview. And for them, I think that this is the most logical explanation. And the reason being is because it is true that in our ancient past, we had very high civilizations. We have Atlantis, which is what I figured which is I eventually realized that's what my memory was not an alien, but it was actually Atlantis. And that's why the high technology was there. And that's why everything looks like another world, is because actually back in our ancient past in Atlantis, we had high technology. And we had incredibly advanced civilization. Even in Lemuria, we were of a different sort of essence, but we still were a different sort of civilization. And so we did have some visitations in that period with beings that were from other spheres. And I think that this is something that a lot of mystery schools really didn't want to talk about because it's so easy for this to get out of hand. But unfortunately, that's exactly what's happening, is it's getting out of hand. And so we did sort of have periods where, in anthroposophy, in Lemuria and Atlantis, Rudolf Steiner talks about kind of walking amongst the gods, sort of, especially in Lemuria. And then he also mentions that they were great initiates from Venus, or angels from Venus. And in the Steiner work, I feel like that's where we begin with this whole topic, is these beings that were able to, at a certain time, kind of descend into our realm, but they weren't aliens, they were just human beings in a different developmental phase than us. And in theosophy, they say these Venusian angels brought manas, or the mind energy. And so there does appear to be certainly in the Eastern tradition, it's very obvious, but even in the Western traditions, we do see this kind of strange phenomenon in our history where apparently these angels from a different developmental plane have visited us, but not in ships. they didn't come necessarily in ships. This is not really what the heart of the story is. It's that at certain times the spheres overlap. And the difference is that once humanity gains their eye and become an individual, that no longer happens. So only when humanity is kind of in this infantile stage, which for us would be like Lemuria and the beginning of Atlantis, we sort of have this overlap with these higher beings. And they sort of train humanity. It's a very strange conversation, and we have to be careful not to take things too literally, but there is that time in our past where we did interact with basically angelic humans. And that's what all of this is really about. And there was also a period where a darker version of that perhaps happened, and there maybe was some modification done. And that is of a lower stream, but it completely captivates people into this origin myth that we're talking about. It's a very long sort of thing. I hope that I'm trying to speed it along, but does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're doing a really good job, because I got the sense from your videos as well that, you know, it needs a lot of background. So
Yes.
you're just skimming the surface, and hopefully people will be open-minded enough to just put a little question mark next to all of this and then go and dive deeper if they want to. There's something I wanted to clarify as well when I'm talking about Darwinism as such. You know, I do think evolution is a reality. It's just what kind of evolution is it we're talking about? And what people seem to do today a lot of the time is make everything purely material. And so I think you're right to mention that, you know, if we give up on the spiritual in any sense, even the soul world, the astral world, if we give up on anything to do with the human being spiritual, being a spiritual being, then we lose a lot. And actually materialism as a worldview doesn't answer any of the questions that we desperately need answered. And it also doesn't add up logically if you follow it through philosophically as well. So anyway, I just wanted to highlight that. But I think you're doing a very good job, and it's very, very difficult what you're approaching there. Where to next? Do you have anything more that you'd like to add?
On the Darwin thing, this has actually been a very contentious issue between mystics and people in the scientific community for a very long time, because in anthroposophy, there is a sense of evolution, but it's more like a metamorphosis over a very long period of time. And the human form always evolves because of spiritual impulses. So the human being is directly interconnected with the earth and the sun and the whole cosmos, and is the expression of the cosmos. That's one of the hermetic laws, actually. And we start dissolving away these hermetic laws, it becomes very psychologically and spiritually dangerous. You know, we are a microcosm of the cosmos, of the macro. That was a law that we used to live by. And that gave us a sense of reason. And it wasn't even necessarily a spiritual thing. It was just something that allowed us to function. So what happens when all of these tenets are removed is we become eroded and stunted, and we begin to accept things that are beneath us. And so the scientism is something that's actually recent. It's a recent development. And so that's important to, I think, bring up as well. And the other thing about Darwinism, which I find really interesting and that I'll put out there, is that, you know, there was, if you look into going back to Lemuria, there is this account in ancient texts and Eastern texts, and certainly I know Theosophy talked about it. I think that Steiner may have talked about it, but there's this idea going back that there was a devolutionary phase in Lemuria where some of the population moved forward, but others actually fell into an ape-like form. And so during that Lemurian age, there was actually this ape form that genuinely was created. And it's very possible that that ape-like human form was raised or something, or that there is something with that. But it's very important to remember that there's also a risen line as well, or a line that was never modified, or a line that was never connected with that. So I hope, does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't fully understand it because there's so much behind it, but yeah, and I think another thing Steiner said as well was that actually without the concept of evolution, anthroposophy couldn't really have arrived in the way it did either, because humans needed to have actually had that concept already. It needed to be in the culture. So, and this isn't an anti-science thing. We're not talking anti-science here in a sense. We're just talking about that, anthroposophy or any kind of spiritual work can take the scientific worldview and in a way amplify it, or be its generous brother or something. I don't know, but yeah. So what do you think about where we're at the moment? I kind of wanted to get to that as well, because I think all of this actually plays into where we're at, humanity at the moment. And maybe that leads a little bit into the way you were in some of your videos looking at popular culture and what's actually happening there. That seems to be, it's almost like the occult rituals are now, taking place in the music videos. I ran a group this morning. We were talking about a lot of very strange things in music videos these days, like the Katy Perry ones where I can't say the word, but she becomes food. Let's put it that way.
Oh.
And there's a few of those around. And then, the way you went through that video of the weekend at the Super Bowl, just looking at these occult ritual type stuff. They had these burn victim masks on, and it was just absolutely crazy. Your reactions were really good. You said one thing that really made me laugh. You said it was like the astral world, the lower astral world just threw up into that really got me. So anyway, long-winded question, but where are we at? Where are we at, Gigi?
No, that's where we are. We are at the point where the lower astral plane has basically thrown up in the world. It feels that way though, doesn't it? It feels like we're in the upside down. It feels like things are getting stranger and stranger and stranger. I keep going back to the eighth sphere when it comes to this. I think I naturally have maybe more of a cosmological feel for things, but I think that if we understand the eighth sphere in Steiner's work, we'll understand a lot of what's going on now. Because how I see it is that the Earth is actually kind of being more and more influenced by that eighth sphere realm. And I feel like through a lot of the discordant technologies, so through basically living in like an electric soup of internet waves and everything, it's almost changing us as people. And I think it's bringing that eighth sphere or that lower plane a lot closer. I think it's affecting us a lot more. So I think that there actually is a change in consciousness to do with that. And I think part of these darker rituals using the anthroposophical view are to bring that eighth sphere closer to us. And I think that that's very much part of what they're trying to do. And how that works is basically through inversion. So you want to invert everything that you possibly can. You want to take a truth and you want to invert it. And so a lot of that, how that happens is through inversion, and also things like humiliation, creating those kind of lower emotions, and also obviously through certain kinds of sexual displays and things like that are also very much part of that whole really religious paradigm of what I would call the eighth sphere. And I think it's just becoming more and more out there, because I think ultimately we've lost that inner sense of ourself. Yeah.
Okay, so it's becoming more and more present for us because we've lost something. Is there also a positive element to it? I mean, some people talk about the fact that it's like these, for want of a better term, the dark things that exist in the cosmos, in ourselves as well. I think that's important to mention, in the earth, that they've always been there in a sense, and it's almost like we're in a period of revelation where things are actually being revealed. So yeah, just to put, not to put a new age positivity spin on everything, but is there a positive element to what's happening in the world?
Yes, it is important to be balanced, because you can so easily just get weighed down by thinking about the weekend's performance or whatever's going on at the Grammys. It's like, whoa. But yeah, the idea is that we see it and we face it head on, and it just drives, it's a mirror of something that is within all of us. We're looking at the shadow of society. Every era has a dark age and a light age. And when we fall into the darker age, we see our own shadow, and the world looks at its shadow. And that's on purpose. That's so we can look at it and say, you know what? This is wrong. Not wrong because it's immoral, but, just some idea of morality or taboo. But this is wrong because it's actually very destructive. And we have to go through and begin to go through that process. And so the idea is that we face all of this sort of head on, and we stay alert, and we don't sleep on it, and we don't avoid it, but the more that we face it head on, the better we are, sort of thing. But it is a reflection of already what's in society. Otherwise it wouldn't be here, it wouldn't exist. So when each one of us can take responsibility for our trauma and our pain and our shadow, then that will lessen also what's in the world. And it will also orient you to kind of where you need to be, and the right people and the right places, so that you can have sort of part of the world that's falling apart and going into this very harmonic transhumanist illusion. But maybe because you're doing your inner work and you're seeing it for what it is and you're facing it head on, you can actually be in a better position than you were 10 years ago, because you could be in a community that's more meaningful, and you could be actually living in a much deeper way because you've seen. So there's absolutely ways we can transform it in our own life. I don't know if it's possible to, change stop other people from doing what they want to do, but you can certainly arrange your life, so that you can heal or turn inward from it, at least.
And do you see, so you mentioned transhumanism in there.
Yeah.
So for people who aren't familiar, this concept that we need to merge with machines, we need to merge with the technology, because this old boring organic thing ain't gonna make it, passe. So you see that as a part of this same drive that's occurring in the world?
Oh, absolutely. It's absolutely the pinnacle of, I think, this kind of harmonic essence. It's a complete mockery of truth. And transhumanism, one way to look at it is basically, it's sort of a way to live forever. So then you don't have to understand any of the mysteries of the soul, transformation and resurrection mysteries and all this kind of stuff. You don't know that. You don't need that. You can just, hook yourself up to a machine and, I don't know, like upload yourself into like the cube or something. It's a complete mockery of very real spiritual processes, but they've turned it into like a scientific contraption, you know, instead of the idea of ascension, it's a resurrection. It's like, no, you go into the cube. Like this is delusion. This is delusional. And we have people sitting up there at, certain forums and things like that are, they're serious about it. This is what they think. And they have more money than any you or I could probably ever imagine. And they have this sort of bizarre, let's put a chip in your brain, and then you'll be clairvoyant. And then you'll be able to tap into the Akashic records, the soul memory of the world. It's like, sir, that is a chip. That is not a clairvoyance. That's not, you didn't earn that ability through, healing yourself. That is a chip, sir. So there is this kind of delusion where they think they can have these spiritual qualities through being making themselves a machine, which is, it's shocking actually how popular it is.
I know it is absolutely shocking. And I think you're right to say it's an inversion of the truth. It's kind of like the truth, but it's inside out, upside down or something, so this living forever, which we possibly already do anyway, but yes. It's this turning it into a material thing, basically.
It's like somebody read every mystical text they could possibly find and then interpreted it in the most literal, scientific way possible. That is what transhumanism reads like to me, is you had access to some really incredible spiritual literature, but you've translated it into being all about technology. That's what it feels like. Because all of these things are basically, like the living forever, clairvoyance, healing yourself, all that kind of stuff is stuff that we have the ability to do. And you could argue that it's part of our initiation as a soul to learn that, to gain mastership or gain these abilities. So it's strange. It's strange to see, the richest people on the planet, going for that when it's incredibly destructive ideology. Yeah.
And they're so open about it, aren't they? Like, you have Yuval Harari, is that his name? Sort of the philosopher behind the World Economic Forum, for example. Probably have to be careful about what we say here, but
yeah.
Who just comes out openly and they say things like, won't it be great when we've all got the chip in our brain or in our arm or whatever, and we'll be able to just think of a packet of biscuits and they'll arrive at the door via an Amazon drone kind of thing. And they're constantly talking about how amazing and great this is going to be. And are we all supposed to just go, yeah, fantastic. So what's going on there with the kind of reveal that they're doing? Because it's just it's all the stuff that so-called conspiracy theorists been saying for 20 years is like now just being said out in the open. What's going on there?
Oh, well, the conspiracy theorists were right. And sometimes I wonder, do they actually believe this? Like, is this something like, are they going to get a chip? Are they going to, or is this just something that they're pitching to the plebs? Sometimes I wonder that is like, are you actually going to do that? Or is this just something that they want everyone else to have? And they don't, sort of thing.
Just on that point, I always think when they say, okay, you can own nothing and you'll be happy, or, you can live in a 15-minute city and never, I want to say, okay, well, you try it first. You own nothing and see if you're happy first and then report back to us. But yeah, I don't know what's going on with this. Yeah. Do they actually believe it themselves? Is it sort of a mind Jedi trick that they're just trying to put across to us, even though they don't really believe it? Don't know.
This is the thing is it's hard to tell, or do they believe it but they're going to have another level of the technology? Like, do they also want to merge with technology, but when they merge with it, they're at the top level and they get a different kind? There's so many red flags with this. and there's so many different things to consider. But there's no question that it's a way to control people. I mean, any freedom-oriented society is not going to have brain chips or any kind of interface with a machine that somebody else controls. That's just not a free society, exclamation point, period. And I think we have to have that sensibility. I think that there's been a lot of plans in place that were written a long time ago. I think power works intergenerationally. And I think that executing it is a very different thing, though. And, if you look at Facebook owner Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse, that was a very expensive project, time-wise for him, and also financially. And it was the biggest failure imaginable. I mean, people were getting sick, they were actually physically ill. So the eyes and the brain actually couldn't handle having these goggles on and seeing the cartoon characters everywhere. And they were actually getting sick.
All right. Yeah, okay. I didn't know about that.
Yeah. And, there was really bizarre predatory things happening in metaverse. So it was a huge flop. And so I think there is the dream of transhumanism and there's the dream of the metaverse, but executing it is very different, very, very different, which I think that they're probably going to find and I think are finding. Yeah.
And so is all of that, whether they know consciously what they're doing or they're doing it unconsciously. I mean, I think some of them are conscious and some of them possibly are not. But ultimately, would you say it's inspired by particular beings?
Yeah. I think that whole ideology is very harmonic in the Steiner work. That I think the idea of a virtual reality is something that Rudolf Steiner explained in regards to the eighth sphere and Ahriman, the being who creates and sort of runs the eighth sphere. It also has a lot of Luciferian elements to it as well. So you have harmonic essences or spirits that could be within us and within the world that are pushing this, and also Luciferic entities that could be behind it as well. I really view it from an esoteric sense as a kind of possession. Just to speak plainly, I do think that it can be viewed as a kind of possession by these forces. And I think it changes the personality. I think it makes you desire to do these things. And that's what I would attribute it to.
And what do we do about that?
Well, I think educating is really important about the spiritual reality that we all live in. So we there are other planes of existence. And part of the reason why this exists is because people just don't believe that there are other planes of existence. They just can't really get their head around it. And by default, that makes it very easy for these darker essences to kind of attach or come into our world because we're kind of unaware. So the first thing is, I think, educating people about other planes, about the spiritual reality that we live in. And then people can start taking responsibility for the aspects of themselves, their astral body. If you don't know that you have an astral body or an etheric body or an eye, if you don't know the actual structure of you, then it's going to be very hard to really confront these esoteric ideologies and these esoteric concepts that absolutely govern the material plane. So the material plane is the result of the spiritual planes. And so there's no way of really kind of controlling or changing anything unless we are able to work on that spiritual level or be a little bit more aware on that spiritual level. And thankfully, we've had some really great people that have left us a lot of clues. You know, we're not walking around completely in the dark. I think, you know, obviously Rudolf Steiner left us the threefold social order, biodynamic gardening. This is one man alone. And then also spiritual science or anthroposophy, right? So we do have the tools. They are there. But every individual has to reach the point where they start asking the questions to lead them to these things. And we all have that moment where we start to answer those questions or we have an experience, and you know, you never know when someone's going to come to that. It's like a miraculous thing. It's a holy thing when someone comes to that within themselves. So yeah.
And is that partly what you're doing and why you started your channel and the work that you do to help people
yes,
do that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's to I guess provide other people with the information that I wish I had. And to get these discussions going and form community and just be a bulwark against or for what is healthy, you know, and that's definitely why I do what I do, probably why you do what you do. And yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Gigi, I think you do a really great job and have done a great service by bringing a lot of the anthroposophical concepts to a wider audience and bringing some of Steiner's ideas and actually making him and his work a little more visible. And I've really appreciated that. And I know people who actually live around these parts in the southwest of the UK follow you quite closely and follow your work, and also Dark Journalist, who you've been on with quite a few times. And so it's much appreciated what you're doing, and keep up the great work. And I just want to say a big thank you for agreeing to come on and have a chat with me today. It's been a real pleasure. I could keep going for hours and hours actually, so I'll have to have you back. But thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for listening to the Spiritual Scientist podcast. You can support us to continue creating the show by becoming a member on YouTube and receive lots of member benefits such as early release videos, member-only chat, and much, much more. Just go down to the bottom of the video where it says join and click on that button to find out more. If you prefer to become a member off YouTube, then you can go to subscribestar.com/MickYoung. That's subscribestar.com/MickYoung. These links are also in the description to the video. And other ways to support the show are to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, or simply like, share the video, and comment on the video. And also, at the time of recording, I'm still actually offering a free spiritual development consultation with me personally. So if you're interested in that, just head over to spiritualscientist.org/call. That's spiritualscientist.org/call. And look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.